Thanks for joining me. What do Adnan Khashoggi, Imelda Marcos and Ratu Mara have in common? Well, I'm afraid the answer, the smarmy swami, merely poses another riddle. But over the next hour, all will be revealed. We've extended tonight's Four Corners to bring you a tale of international intrigue that's taken several months to unravel. The action crisscrosses the globe, but Tony Jones begins his astonishing story here in Sydney.
On the 24th of May last year, a story of intrigue began unravelling itself here at Sydney's Port Botany. It's a story about guns, money, and power in the South Pacific. In the early hours of that morning, a container on its way to strife-torn Fiji was offloaded onto Australian soil. Its contents included a deadly cargo of weapons and ammunition bought on the Middle Eastern black market. Only a month earlier, another container load of arms had passed through the port unnoticed. The man behind these shipments, the now notorious Mohammed Kahan, says these were but a small part of the arms he bought. How long before and that all of them passed through Australia?
Well, the coup was in May, and the first substantial landing I think we made is in October.
The first landing of arms?
Mm-hmm. A fairly large quantity of arms went in October. They are what we call it deep down, and they're in secure hands. They are not only in the hands of Indian people, but the hands of the Fijian people as well.
For most Fijians, that's a chilling thought.
If ever Khan's arms are used in Fiji, it will cause devastation and destruction unheard of and unseen of in Fiji.
But the attitude of the Australian government to these weapons is odd, to say the least.
But I don't think it would have caused a lot of, damage to anybody. It seemed to be, as I understand, a conglomerate of equipment. Certainly it was firearms and weapons of a type, but it, it was not as though it was going to arm any battalion or anything like that.
Assault rifle, check made, year of manufacture 68, serial number, uniform 65319. RPG, Chicom, year of manufacture in 1986, serial number 2825.
But contrary to that information passed on to the Attorney-General by ASIO, Kahan's captured arms, now in the hands of the Australian Army, are part of a quite sophisticated arsenal.
And serial number...
The contents of his container included 140 Czech automatic assault rifles, Chinese grenade launchers, mortars, mines, and a vast quantity of ammunition. This grenade launcher is just a small part of Mohammed Kahan's illegal arms shipment. But these lethal weapons are what it's all about. Enough guns and ammunition for a small army. They were destined for a covert operation in Fiji, an operation whose real purpose was clouded by false trails and mystery. Well, tonight we'll try to shed some light on that mystery, for the story behind these weapons remains political dynamite. It haunts the future of Fiji, and as we'll see, raises some very serious questions right here in Australia. It was called the biggest illegal arms shipment ever uncovered in this country, and the press had a field day as a profile was built up of the main villain, Mohammed Kahan, a Fijian citizen himself, but also an international criminal, a man who's been deported 3 times from Australia. He'd come here to oversee the shipment, but given his record, how did he arrive here unnoticed? And even more embarrassing, how did he escape once the arms were discovered? He was finally tracked down to London and arrested there.
Members of Britain's Metropolitan Extradition Squad swooped on a London address and arrested Kahan.
Then, after 8 months in prison, Kahan was freed when the Bow Street Magistrates Court threw out an attempt by Fiji to extradite him.
Well, I'm elated. For the people of Fiji, it's victory. And emotional. I suffered a lot.
Kahan had flaunted international laws and got away with it. But although this well-turned-out arms smuggler was enjoying something of a celebrity status while we were filming, he's now back in jail. We've been told that the new case against him is again related to arms dealing.
I speak to Jim, please.
While he was free, though, Kahan was at great pains to appear every inch a political activist.
The Labour conference is from October 1 to October the 6th. And our conference is scheduled from 7th to the 10th.
It's not clear why Kahan has chosen to speak out about his operation. But where possible, we've sought to corroborate his story. Where that has not been possible, the extraordinary events that surround his activities appear to add credibility to it. Certainly, the claims he makes about the Australian end of his operation justify further investigation. You had a person you've described to me as a link man. Can you tell me what his role was?
Well, a link man is, as the title suggests, a link man. But this particular link man obviously had a lot of connections and some substantial amount of authority to get things done.
Connections in the security organisation within Australia?
Connections in right places, in customs, security, you know, wherever. If ever need arises, he seems to do the magic.
What were his connections, do you know? Was he connected with a particular intelligence organisation within Australia?
I cannot categorically say which government level he was connected with, but I'm saying is that he seems to have influence or connection in the right places to make things happen. And I was not concerned as to how he gets it done, as long as the job is done. If I have a problem, I tell him, and his job is to get the problem solved.
And this person, was he an Australian national?
Yes, he's a dinky-die Aussie, as we said.
The process of examining Kahan's story takes you back to the discovery of the arms. After a delay of several days, the container was located here on the wharves at Sydney's Darling Harbour. The Customs Service claims it was decided to inspect the container after an officer was alerted by documents showing used machinery coming from the Middle East. But according to the Federal Attorney General, Lionel Bowen, the real story is rather different.
There was apparently some Indian gentleman worrying, allegedly, the customs official with repeated calls as to where was his container, and the customs official was that interested in the fact of the frequency of the calls, he decided to have a look in the container. When he did that, which was purely out of his curiosity, and sees what's there, he decided to ring ASIO. That's the way that matter developed.
On that scenario, Customs must have known, or at least suspected some days earlier, that the man responsible for this arsenal was in the country. But when they finally opened the container and found the weapons, they failed to inform the federal police of this. Later that day, they recreated their dramatic find for their own publicity cameras. But first, they called in ASIO.
The first thing I heard was that there'd been discovery of a container which had some military equipment in it. The container was in transit, that ASIO were involved, and there was a problem from the point of view of security. I can tell you that as I'm responsible for ASIO, I made some inquiries, and they said, oh, we were invited down to the wharf by Customs, and when we looked at the issue there, which was a conglomerate of things inside a container, none of them seemed to have any coordination or any real intelligence from the point of view of military equipment, but there are arms or something of a nature there. It didn't really concern ASIO, and Customs were telling us at the time that they had the matter under control, and that they didn't want us to do anything about it, us being ASIO.
That same afternoon, while the Attorney General was being briefed by ASIO, a Financial Review journalist was also being briefed by an unknown source. Though there'd still been no investigation of the people behind the arms, no attempt was made to block or delay the story, and it duly appeared on Tuesday morning. So with the story now broken and out in the public, Customs decided to make a virtue out of necessity and hold a press conference to take credit for their discovery. By now, though, both Customs and ASIO knew that the man they wanted was in Sydney. But we've been told by a senior federal policeman that ASIO told Customs to sit on that information and not tell anyone. Well, certainly the farcical events that follow seem to back up that notion.
Ah, this gentleman. Yes. How do you do?
Have a chat to you about
Sit down.
Shortly after the press conference, two Customs intelligence officers, Senior Inspectors Toohey and Wolfe, went to interview the shipping agent who'd worked for Kahan. It was the first time he'd been spoken to. They questioned the man about the previous container he'd handled for Kahan a month earlier and told him about the discovery of the weapons. The shipping agent denied any knowledge of the arms and told them that the man they were after was Mohammed Kahan and where he was staying in the city. At this point, the man says one of the officers made a quick phone call and said simply, he's at the West End Hotel. We've been unable to find out who that call was to. The shipping agent then told them that Kahan still owed him money and he intended to go and get it from him while he could. He suggested that they come along and arrest Kahan at the same time.
You can get him now.
They allowed him to go alone and asked him only to telephone if he made contact. In Sydney's Pitt Street sometime later, the shipping agent says he miraculously found Kahan walking towards his hotel and steered him instead into a nearby cafe. He believes that Kahan was still unaware at this time that the arms had been discovered. They ordered coffee, made small talk, and after a short discussion, Kahan agreed to pay up part of his bill in cash. When Kahan left, the man surreptitiously followed him out of the cafe and watched him walk next door to the hotel. Immediately, the shipping agent dashed off to call the customs officers. Yet in spite of the fact that the hotel is less than 100 metres from the Sydney headquarters of the Federal Police, the Customs Officer Wolf apparently showed no interest in taking any action. He agreed the man should watch the hotel himself and call back again if Kahan left. But by now, Kahan had realised the danger he was in. He threw his gear together so quickly that incriminating documents spilled onto the floor. He now claims he hadn't been warned by media reports at all, but had been tipped off.
And I was advised that I am not welcome anymore, that the container has been taken off the ship, and then I must find the nearest exit and get out.
And did you do that?
Naturally, it was in my own interest, and also the interest of the people who were protecting me.
You were warned to get out, and were you told that someone would help you to get out in any way?
That somebody will oversee my exit.
And who was that person?
Well, I cannot tell you that, sir.
What role did that person have? Was that...
Obviously, he must have had some kind of influence somewhere on the line that in case something went wrong, he may be able to intervene or do something whereby I am not held in the country. I am outside the country.
Did you meet that person at all that day?
Well, definitely, that man made it possible for me to get out. He's shadowing me. He's protecting me in the fact that I must get out. And this man was sent to me by the link man.
As incredible as it sounds, Kahan claims that while the shipping agent was playing amateur sleuth for customs, he was, in turn, being watched by a professional whose job it was to help him escape. The shipping agent did see Kahan hurriedly leave the hotel, but lost sight of him further down the street. So after watching Australia's most wanted man scuttle off down Pitt Street, he says he again phoned Senior Inspector Wolf. This time, the incredulous shipping agent said he was simply thanked for his efforts and told top marks for trying. Later that day, Kahan flew to Brisbane. But it was not until the next day that he actually left the country, travelling to Singapore on a friend's passport. With all this out in the open, Customs is still ducking inquiries about the whole bizarre episode. They've refused to answer any of our questions. Yet surely the public has a right to know exactly how it was that Kahan was allowed to escape. Under whose orders were the customs officers proceeding? Were they under riding instructions from their own department, from ASIO or from any other intelligence agency? We do know, at least for their part, that ASIO has assured the Attorney-General that their hands are clean. Are you quite certain that ASIO had nothing to do with the surveillance operation on Kahan?
Oh, positive. It had nothing to do with ASIO. It still hasn't, never did have.
Whatever the involvement of our current batch of spies, we've been told that Federal Police have been investigating a former spy in connection with the Fiji Arms affair. The man once held a senior position in defence intelligence and fits Kahan's profile of his so-called link man. By the time the Federal Police were properly briefed on the arms, Kahan was winging his way out of the country.
However, the fact remains that tonight, Mohammed Rafiq Kahan is still at large. Meanwhile, in Sydney,
but the AFP's chief investigator soon fueled speculation with a claim that hundreds of Fijians living in Australia may have been involved in the arms conspiracy.
There is certainly a strong network here, part of which we suggest supported the arms shipment. I think that probably the vast majority of the people here in Sydney are not violent and would prefer to take action by some sort of passive method.
In Suva,
And in Fiji itself, the arms discovery intensified the already unstable political climate. As the army and police searched frantically for arms caches, one observer described a wave of hysteria and military oppression.
50 AK 47 rifle.
After raids on 6 farmhouses around the cane-growing districts on the west coast of the main island, the army displayed what it described as 10 tons of captured weapons from Kahan's April shipment. A large number of people were finally charged, the so-called Latoka 21. A short time later, federal police investigators were dispatched to Fiji to interview witnesses. One of those they interviewed, a man named Sahid, made a statement implicating in the arms network influential supporters in Australia of deposed Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Bavandra.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome the elected and rightful Prime Minister of Fiji, Dr. Timothy Bavandra.
The statement wrongly names former South Australian Premier Don Dunstan as being involved. It also names a large number of prominent members of the Australian Fijian community. It's true to say that on the basis of Sahid's statement, senior federal police assumed that Bavandra's people were behind the arms shipment. But the case of Taimur Ahmed, the Sydney man accused of being Kahan's deputy commander, was dropped when a solicitor from the Director of Public Prosecutions went to Suva to again interview Sahid and decided he was an unreliable witness. The decision angered some federal police, who also watched with dismay the events in the Bow Street Magistrates Court in London, from where Fiji unsuccessfully attempted to extradite Kahan. Despite being urged by Scotland Yard to apply for Kahan's extradition to face charges in Australia, the federal government refused to do so.
The issue in law is, would we have been successful in extradition? The answer was no. Secondly, why should we, as a matter of policy, seek to have somebody come from England to Australia when the offence was to be committed against Fiji, Fiji itself seeking the extradition?
Now, my view on this is, first of all, there are offences that Kahan could have been charged with, which are extraditable offences under statute, and also common law crimes, so he could be extradited for them. Secondly, even if there are problems, why not have a go? I mean, arms importing is a terribly serious crime, very serious crime. I think at the end of the day, you've got to say, if you want to get to the bottom of the whole story, there has to be a full inquiry into this whole matter from beginning to end, from the Keystone Cops exercise where it started off right to the bitter end.
In our attempt to get to the bottom of this story, we return to the epicentre of the British Commonwealth, to Buckingham Palace, home of the former Queen of Fiji. Rigidly hidebound by convention, the Queen refused to meet her loyal subject, Timothy Bavandra, when he arrived on her doorstep in 1987, having just been deposed by a coup.
Within minutes of reaching Britain last weekend, Bavandra had been reminded that the diplomatic cold shoulder was invented in Whitehall.
But while the British were slamming doors in Bavandra's face, one man was making unsuccessful efforts to meet him. That man was Mohammed Kahan. At the time, London barrister Jaz Chotu was Dr. Bavandra's legal representative.
I believe the first time we came across Kahan, or Khan, I don't know which of the aliases you want to use, but the first time we came across him was at the Palace Talks in London. He attempted to infiltrate the delegates representing Dr. Bavandra, his ministers and so on and so forth. and he was getting firmly his message across that he believed that a military initiative was the only initiative whereby Dr. Bavandra's government could be restored to power.
I heard that he was after me. I never saw him. But then I said, look, if people want to meet the guy, if you want to, as has always been my policy, if these are people who want to see us, listen to him and find out what he wants. But insofar as assistance is concerned, my line is along the line of non-violent means.
So you didn't want to know about his proposal for some sort of violent struggle?
No, I didn't. I wanted to make it clear, that's the way I look at things. If he was interested in helping, then it would have to be along that line.
Needless to say, immediately after the coup, there are many countries in the world who have vested interest, and they all made overtures to Dr. Bavandra and his government. They offered assistance, military assistance, in return for military contracts, in return for trade contracts, in return for furthering commercial vested interests, really. Mohammed Khan's overtures to Dr. Bavandra were rejected and repelled initially, and then it became quite apparent that Kahan was not speaking as an individual, but he had certain, in particular one Middle Eastern country, backing him. And when that became apparent to us, we felt that he was a force to be contended with.
We've been told that some of those people who contacted the Bavandra camp offering assistance for a military option were in fact put in touch with Kahan by Fijians in pressure groups not so committed to a peaceful resolution to the Fijian problem. Connections were made in the Middle East where Kahan, as a Muslim, already had contacts. In fact, he claims to have had secret military training in the Middle East, in a pro-Western country, that is. That may simply be a bizarre fantasy, but in real life, Kahan is a bizarre person. Our investigations show he's closely connected to at least one notorious Saudi Arabian billionaire, which we'll detail later in the program. But through the pressure group, he was able to make other connections as well. How much money was involved in these offers that were coming from these Middle Eastern businessmen?
A substantial amount of money could be available for a successful operation, and also for good investments in the region.
How much are we talking about? Millions of dollars?
Oh, definitely millions of dollars. I think it was revealed that in my buying spree, I've spent 28 million US dollars. And that's a substantial amount of arms, of money to be spent on arms.
Now, what would have been in it, if you like? What was the quid pro quo? Why would Middle Eastern businessmen be providing that sort of money? That's a huge amount of money, $28 million.
Well, I didn't say that all money came from that Middle Eastern source. Of course, a lot of money came from our own people as well. A lot of Asian people who have been subject to all kinds of sufferance for the last 20-odd years. Around the world, these people have run away from Uganda. Some were thrown away from British Guyana. Well, people in general, the Asian people living outside India and outside Fiji, felt for their brothers in Fiji. And so it wasn't much of a difficult for us to raise funds.
But $28 million is a lot of funds.
28 million is nothing. It's nothing. There are people who are super rich, we don't know them. They could be just camouflaged, they could be still driving a small car. but they're rich.
And those people were prepared to back you all the way?
Well, not only to back me, but to back the people of, the Asian people in Fiji. I mean, the real question is, how long are we going to be subjected to this kind of nonsense, you want to call it? Everywhere we've been kicked out. There is 55% Asian people living in British Guyana, and the power was taken away from them by Burnham. And the people were kicked out, and of course a lot of other things happened before that in Uganda and some South Africa. Okay, and it happened now in Fiji. Which is the country next we're going to suffer? When are we going to stand up and say, enough, fellows, whoever is doing this to us, we're going to take them on. We've got the money, we've got the brains. We never took up arms, and this time we're going to take them arms. Because in the human context, we respect force. We respect authority. We respect people who stand up for their own right. Time has come for the Asians around the world to say, okay, we've suffered enough.
But of course there's also a financial imperative, wasn't there? I mean, what was in it for them, if you like, in terms of the future of Fiji?
Business, because Fiji could become like another Singapore or better. We have ideal location in the South Pacific, economically and militarily. You see?
Kahan now had the money and the personal incentive to make even more. All he needed now was weapons, and as it turned out, he already had the right connections. For a front, he used the company name Quintex. This tiny office in downtown London was his base. It's such a shoestring operation that it's difficult to believe the sums of money Kahan claims to have spent. Nor did he offer any evidence to prove such huge figures were involved. Yet sophisticated arms did get through. And there's evidence that the network of companies involved is linked to that used for the flow of arms to the US-backed Contra forces fighting the government of Nicaragua. On Kahan's transshipment documents we acquired in Australia, the company listed as sender of the container is Quintex Trican. Kahan's card, which he handed around in Australia, refers to a company known as Trican Ventures, based in Vancouver, Canada. Company searches have revealed that Kahan is in fact a director of Trican Ventures. Our investigations into these companies show direct links to the complex financial network which was established in Canada by the Saudi Arabian businessman and international arms trader Adnan Khashoggi.
For my defense and look forward to clearing my name at trial. I assure you I'll be here for the trial. I have been told by my attorneys that it is inappropriate in the United States to comment any further about this matter. I will, of course...
Khashoggi himself is now on bail of $14 million US, facing charges in the United States of fraudulent involvement with the former Philippines President Marcos.
Well, the man has a lot of influence and got a lot of connections and a lot of right connections. And he also can make things happen.
Adnan Khashoggi?
Yes.
What do you know of his operations?
It's a massive operation. Sometimes too big for me to comprehend.
Is he the linchpin in this arms deal that you're involved in?
Again, you're asking me a direct question, sir. I will not pinpoint anybody or name anybody.
Now, the arms shipment found in Sydney included consignment papers, and the name on the consignment papers was Quintex Trican. Now, that's an Adnan Khashoggi shelf company, isn't it?
Quintex is London-based, but the other company is overseas-based.
Trican?
Yeah.
Trican is, in fact, an Adnan Khashoggi shelf company. We've checked.
Okay. So that's, you know, I mean, But that doesn't mean that Adnan Khashoggi is directly involved.
What, involved through
whatever?
Some of his lieutenants, perhaps?
Okay, so maybe some of his juniors were involved.
Isn't the reality there that you're intricately linked through all these companies to the Khashoggi network?
A lot of money we're talking about. And all this money comes about through these connections, through people we know. And a lot of fancy footwork has to be done. A lot of covert operation has to be done. And all this can only be possible if we know the right people, or if you're connected to the right people. Otherwise, all this cannot happen. So we live in a very difficult world, I'm going to call it. In that sense that to make things happen, you alone cannot do it. I alone could not have done what has happened. I had to have help from other people.
With connections like these, Kahan was clearly playing in the big league. The Trican Group was part of a massive restructuring of Khashoggi companies after he was revealed as the mastermind behind the arms for hostages deal with Iran, the scandal that became known as Iran-gate. The US court action against Khashoggi for alleged involvement in laundering money for Ferdinand Marcos was a further blow to the extravagant billionaire. Now, a former insider in the Khashoggi empire has agreed to explain the role of the Trican companies. Timothy Khan is not related to Mohammed Kahan. In fact, he joined Khashoggi's network at a senior level in 1983.
Trican is basically a company that has various subsidiaries. They have Trican Corporation, Trican Investments Limited, Trican Ventures, and Quintex Trican in London.
Do you believe that these companies that we're talking about, in particular the Trican Group, have any involvement at all with the investment of the Marcos monies?
Yes, there have been Marcos funds that have been laundered through these companies, Trican Investments, Trican Ventures. Because of the diversity of the companies and where they are, their geographic locations, they go all the way from London to the Caymans, to Netherlands Antilles, and one of the main ways to move these funds around was to move it discreetly outside of Triad, which was Mr. Khashoggi's control companies, because they were just after the Iran-gate, too many people investigating that.
Have you ever heard of that company, Trican Ventures, being involved before in arms deals of any kind?
No, not Trican Ventures itself, but the principals of Trican, whether they be Mr. Mohammed Kahan or whether they be indirectly Mr. Khashoggi, have all had dealings in the arms business. It is my opinion that they have basically used more so the Trican London company to transact armed transactions with.
What we're going to try to do is to get somebody to make a cold call.
What do you know of Mohammed Kahan himself?
I'm not too familiar with Mr. Kahan. I have heard his name many times in the circle, but I have never face-to-face met him at all. I do know that he is associated with the Trican companies. He is responsible for some of their activities and basically acts mostly as a front man for the sort of as I call them, the heavy-duty hitters behind the scene.
And we were instead betrayed, abandoned, and left to defend ourselves.
The public inquiry into Iran-gate showed how the CIA and Colonel Oliver North used the Khashoggi network to organise funding for their secret arms deals with Iran. But Timothy Khan claims these CIA deals continued even after the hearings had finished, this time through the Trican network of companies.
Most definitely. First of all, if I may bring to your attention that Mr. Khashoggi's companies, Triads International, Triad America, etc., have always had CIA connections. On staff at our offices in New York were two former CIA associates, and therefore extensively most of our intelligence that we gathered when we did business internationally, whether for TRICAN or whether it was done for Triad, relied very heavily on information from the CIA.
And was the CIA also being supplied with operation as a result of the dealings that these companies were having with overseas countries and so on?
Yes, many times the CIA would request us to participate in transactions that they could not directly participate in, or where the United States government could not directly, for political reasons, participate.
Timothy Khan has definite views on the associations of his Fijian namesake, Mohammed Kahan. Do you believe it would be inevitable that he too would have had dealings with the CIA?
Oh, most definitely, without a question. When you are involved in the nature of business of these companies, which is basically you cannot move funds of the magnitude that are moved around without it being detected or without it having, you having strategic alliances somewhere. And the CIA, as far as, and now I'm going to say we were concerned, speaking as part of the Khashoggi group was, and TRICAN is, always looking for strategic alliances. You have to do things and you have to make those alliances, and the CIA is the people that you make those alliances with.
All of this begs the question as to who the arms were really going to, as the clear purpose was to put force in the hands of one political faction.
By the time of the discovery, that Umar was already in government. They already had their own guns. They used the guns to get us out of office, you know. Why more guns? We, on the other hand, didn't use guns. We were not interested in guns. We didn't like guns. You know, this was the sort of thing that I pondered over, and didn't really come to any firm conclusion, because even until now, I still don't know, you know, what really happened and what is the truth.
The truth lies in these idyllic and strategically located islands. But to understand what really happened, we must delve into the complex and Machiavellian world of Fijian politics. For 17 years after Fiji gained its independence from Britain, the political system was held together by a big chief, Ratu Sir Kamasesi Mara, big in tribal rank and big in physical stature.
What Mr. Reddy is saying is that the opposition will make Fiji a republic.
For that whole period, Mara gloried in his role as the statesman of the South Pacific, a big wheel whose grasp on power tightened until it seemed his for life. The election victory of Dr. Timothy Bavandra's Labour coalition in 1987 must have stunned Mara. No one expected him to give up power lightly, but the military coup on the 14th of May gave it back to him much sooner than anyone had expected. The Bavandra government lasted less than 1 month. Mara has always denied any complicity in the coup. It was the Tauke movement, a racist pro-Fijian organisation whose members acted to destabilise the country, to give Colonel Sitiveni Rambuka the excuse to step in, seize control and become Fiji's second strongman. Now the former vice president of the Tauke movement, Ratu Meli Vesekula, says he's convinced Mara sanctioned the coup. What makes you think that Ratu Mara supported the first coup?
Because I had seen 2 affidavits which clearly implicated him and his son Ratufino Mara. And on top of that, the people who actually took part in the planning of the coup told me physically that they did visit him and informed him of their plot.
And what did they say happened at that meeting?
They said that they found him quite downhearted, but when they mentioned the plot to him, he definitely perked up and became cheerful and confirmed his support to their plan, except that he couldn't come out publicly to support them because of what he had already said about his support for democracy in Fiji.
What plan exactly did they outline to him, did they tell you?
They told me that they planned to destabilize the country, and at the appropriate time, the military will step in and take over government.
Now, one of the people that told you this, I believe, was Johnny Visaimasama, who at the time was General Secretary of the Alliance Party.
Yes, he was one of them.
What else did he tell you?
He also told me that Ratu Finau was sent down to the Fijian hotel where Ratu Mara was attending a conference on Wednesday to inform Ratu Mara that the coup had been brought forward one day. But as well as that, he also told me that a few moments after the coup had gone in, that he physically telephoned Ratu Mara at the Fijian to let him know that the Eagle had landed.
The Eagle had landed?
The Eagle had landed.
How important, do you believe, would Ratu Mara's support have been for these men to continue with their plot?
Very, very important. So important, I feel that had he not given or withdrawn his support, then I believed the coup wouldn't have taken place.
It's not known exactly where the government members are being held, but in all probability they are now at the army camp at Queen Elizabeth Barracks. Colonel Rambuka, while in Parliament, told the opposition members to go back to their office and made no statement in Parliament that this was a military coup.
At 10 o'clock this morning, members of the Royal Fiji Military Forces took over the government of Fiji.
The coup ushered Rambuka into power and began a period of confused infighting among the ruling elites.
Have suspended the Constitution of Fiji.
Though no longer the paramount leader, Mara was still in the forefront of the country's new governing body. But the ruling Council of Ministers, as it was called, became a platform for competing aspirations. Under pressure from the Tauke movement, Rambuka staged the second coup in September 1987.
Citizens and peoples of Fiji, as you may have probably heard or know, the Royal Fiji Military Forces have today, at 4 p.m., reasserted its authority over the government of Fiji and reassumed executive authority which had been in the hands of His Excellency the Governor-General. It was my intention to see that the Constitution of Fiji would forever enshrine and safeguard the paramountcy of the interests of the Tauke in his homeland.
Only 2 months later, Rambuka declared Fiji a republic, cutting all ties with Britain. And the first decree of the fledgling Republic of Fiji was the appointment of Ratu Mara as Prime Minister. It was a return to the old order. After 2 coups, Mara was back in power. But some of the diehards in the Tauke movement felt betrayed. As this document shows, they no longer trusted the motives of Ratu Mara. Secret meetings were held with senior army officers to plan a third coup. Now, in the period after the second coup, I believe that feeling led to an actual plot to hatch a third coup to unseat Ratu Mara.
Yes.
And the third coup would have been instigated by Rambuka himself or members of his officer corps?
Yes, I believe the members of his officer corps would have instigated that coup.
Do you believe they were sent along to those meetings by Rambuka?
Oh, yes, I can't believe otherwise. I believe that they were sent along by the commander.
Over the past few weeks, Ratu Meli Vesekula has been in Australia. He's here to explain why he's now switched allegiance from the Tauke movement to Dr. Bavandra. His turnaround is all the more dramatic for the fact that he'd actually been a minister for a period in the military government and was, in every sense, an insider with knowledge of the personalities and events that we're examining. He's told us that during the desperate period of infighting that preceded the arms shipments, Mohammed Kahan engineered a meeting with him, which Vesekula interprets as an attempt to draw him into the arms conspiracy. When you met Kahan, did he tell you anything about his belief as to who would be best to run Fiji?
Yes, he said that the country needed Ratu Mara. The country needed his expertise, his diplomacy, and his statesmanship.
And is that when he said that a military option might be possible?
Yes, if necessary. If it's necessary for a military option, they will be able to provide the staff to ensure that Ratu Mara is left to lead the country.
It was not the first indication that the arms may have been destined for supporters of Ratu Mara. Many of the Latoka 21, arrested after the army tracked down Kahan's April shipment, proved to be staunch Mara supporters. One man not among the 21 was a Fijian named Bokani, who we've been told was a friend of Kahan. He and his brother, an army officer, were alleged to have helped Kahan with the arms shipment. The brothers were from the island of Lao, Ratu Mara's heartland and constituency. During this tense period, former Tauke activist Tony Stevens was in jail with Bokani. Stevens was facing charges he later beat on appeal.
Bokani told me that Kahan worked for brought in the guns for and on behalf of the Alliance people. And that his contact was K.R. Lachin.
Mara, in fact, had many close supporters among the Indian business community. The man K.R. Lachin was a member of parliament in Mara's alliance government. Stevens was told that Lachin was one of the financiers of the arms shipments. And did Bokani tell you what role he himself and his brother, the army officer, were to have in this matter?
Well, his brother was involved in getting the container cleared for a price, which was a motorcycle. And Bokani, because of his special relationship with Khan, they were jailmates and all that, was supposed to assist with Khan with the training, getting people around, getting the guns around Fiji.
They were supposed to assist with training and what, distribution of the weapons?
Yes.
Did he tell you anything else, this Bokani?
Only that there was there's quite a lot of guns and ammunition still lying around the countryside. There was a lot more than that was mentioned.
Did he tell you that there may have been other shipments?
He told me that there was a lot more than it was found.
The thrust of this complex story is echoed by Kahan himself.
Well, Ratu Mara was becoming very jittery about the fact that there was certain forces, in particular Tauke movement, putting pressure on Rambuka to ask Mara to step aside. And Ratu Mara didn't want to go away that way. In fact, they were going to sack him. So we signaled through Mara's connection to Mara that this has been planned. And I think that you should...
Can we go back over that again? Yeah. I gather that Ratu Mara was feeling uncertain about his future in any sort of Rambuka-led, or in any sort of government that had Rambuka as the most powerful force.
A certain number of business people always voted for Ratu Mara. When the coup took place, they could not give their allegiance to Rambuka. And though they had intelligence information showing that Ratu Mara's hand has been dirty in the coup as well, but they know Ratu Mara. Despite the fact that his hands is dirty, they still thought if they have to choose between Rambuka and Ratu Mara, they will stay with Ratu Mara. And when Ratu Mara's position was threatened, these Indian people who were backing Ratu Mara, and these are business people, people with a lot of influence, people with a lot of money, they got afraid too. And Ratu Mara was afraid as well.
They were looking for some way to get rid of Rambuka, and they came to you. What, right. Offering financial support?
Yes, they were offering financial support.
To buy arms?
To buy arms, you know. But we were buying arms before that. I mean, we were doing, to a certain extent, they knew what we were doing. So, if Ratu Mara went, these people would be left in cold.
Enter the Swami, Sri Chandra Maharaj. For what story of intrigue would be complete without a Swami? In a time-honoured tradition, this Swami is a spiritual and financial guru for the world's rich and famous. He preaches a strange mixture of Christianity and Islam.
There are quite a number of Swamis, but there was a Swami that was very closely associated with Ratu Mara. In the last election, which was 1987, he was reportedly in Suva to see Ratu Mara and told him about the future of the election in Fiji. And it was reported in the papers then that the Swami was met at the airport by Ratu Mara's security officer, who then whipped him across to Suva for a meeting with Ratu Mara. So there was that link with Swami.
As it happens, the good Swami, who carries, among others, a Fijian passport, had come to Fiji in Adnan Khashoggi's private jet. He too was a central figure in the Iran-Contra arms scandal. And what's more, his own company, Sarasvati International, is deeply intertwined with the Trican group of companies through a bank which it finances in the tax haven of the Cayman Islands. The Swami's connections to Ratu Mara are equally secretive. To insiders in the Khashoggi circle, he bragged about the closeness of his relationship to the Fijian Prime Minister. We've been told by a reliable source that the Swami's flying trip to Fiji was to discuss the possibility of the former dictator of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, coming to live there to escape scrutiny of his assets in the United States.
If you know the Swami and the way he operates, he would pat the Prime Minister of Fiji on his shoulders and on the backside, and say he's a good, trusted friend of mine. He's a follower of mine. He believes in what I'm doing, and he can be very helpful to all of us. And I think the Swami's motives behind this were financial.
We've been told too of meetings in Hawaii in 1986 between Mara and another key man in the Khashoggi circle. There are clear associations with key figures in the very network of companies through which the arms appear to have been procured. This raises questions which only Ratu Mara can answer. But for his part, the statesman of the Pacific has refused our request for an interview. On questions related to the arms affair, the following statement was released to us on his behalf. The allegations are outrageous, absurd, malicious, and totally false.
Serial number, uniform 63498. Victor 56488.
It's not hard to imagine the sort of damage secret stockpiles of weapons like this could do in a tiny country of only 750,000 people.
Uniform 624.
But while we've no evidence that Ratu Mara himself knew of the arms plot, there's little doubt the weapons were being organised to preserve his rule. And if supporters of the Prime Minister did allow themselves to become enmeshed in such incredible plans, we are bound to ask whether he had any knowledge of those plans. Outside of Ratu Mara, other questions also arise. did the CIA sanction this whole strange operation? And did our own intelligence services have knowledge of what was going on?
Victor 718.
Only an independent commission of inquiry could get to the bottom of the Fijian end, and in the present climate, that's unlikely to happen.
Tony Jones with that disturbing story of bumbling and intrigue, a sort of Kahan-gate. Next week's Four Corners exposes another great deception, one that's costing Australian motorists millions of dollars a year. Marion Wilkinson has been investigating dozens of suspect insurance claims arising from a series of road accidents with a string of coincidences. That's Highway Robbery, next Monday at 8:30. Good night.